It's that time again, Our Town Live, where friends, family, people you know share with us their unique bits of wisdom. And now, here's Herb, your host, for another show.
Today's episode features one of this country's premier corporate comedians, Greg Schwem. For the past 20 years, while his fellow comedians toiled in smoky comedy clubs, Greg switched his focus to the corporate market. He has traveled the world making Fortune 500 companies and professional business associates laugh at themselves, in the process earning the label King of the Hill in the world of corporate comedy from the Chicago Tribune. Greg has appeared in 48 out of 50 U.S. states and multiple foreign countries. He considers shows in Vienna, Austria, Poznan, Poland, and Cuzco, Peru, among his favorites. He is a sought-out emcee for corporate events and has opened acts for musical stars such as Keith Urban, Celine Dion, Julio Iglesias, and his son Enrique, and many, many more. Greg also gives his time and his humor to multiple charitable, religious, and philanthropic organizations, including the Alliance Against Intoxicated Motorists, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans, and the United Methodist Church. So if you think you want to be a professional comedian, let's listen to how it all began. Here's Greg.
I was a newspaper and then a TV reporter in Florida, believe it or not. That's what I did when that was my college degree, was journalism, and that's what I thought I was destined to do. And for the longest time, that's what I wanted to do. But I've always had a hobby of being a comedian. I started doing stand-up comedy when I was 16, and it was just something that I thought would always be a hobby, but it turned into more of a hobby, and I decided I enjoyed making people laugh more than I enjoyed, well, basically depressing them, because if you're a member of the news media, eventually you have to write a lot of stories that are not exactly on the most pleasant topics, and I certainly was not writing about pleasant topics when I was down in Florida. I did a lot of stories. I was the cop reporter for my newspaper, so that was about as unfunny as you could get. But anyway, so after 5 years of being a journalist, I just decided I'd better try it now while I was still single and young and had a decent car. So I quit my job and I became a full-time comedian, and I moved back to Chicago, and that's what I've been doing ever since. But then my career's taken a lot of different turns, as most people do who are in show business, but I'm still doing it.
How old were you when you made the change?
I was 26. 26, yeah. I moved down to Florida when I was 21, right out of college, and I stayed there for 5 years.
What was your epiphany?
As far as an epiphany of why I needed to be a comedian?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, I think it was seeing other people on stage making a living at it and saying to myself, I know I'm funnier than that guy. And that was, I think, what prompted me to do it full time. And I think the epiphany that I had, that I always wanted to make people laugh, was just, I think really that happened in high school. That was the first time I ever got on stage and did a stand-up comedy performance, and it went very well. And I was hooked from that moment on. If it hadn't gone well, I might never have gotten on stage again. There's probably a lot of very, very funny guys out there, and girls, who are working run-of-the-mill jobs, who probably could have been very, very successful as comedians, but they had one bad show right off the bat and said, I can't do this.
How important is fortitude?
How important is what?
Fortitude.
Fortitude. Well, it's very important. It's what kind of keeps me going. I wake up every morning and I realize that I don't make money unless I make people laugh, unless I'm continuing to write and continuing to improve and continuing to reinvent myself. So I feel like there's fortitude going for me every day, and I think that's why I've been able to do this for 30 years. I think there's an awful lot of people in this business who wake up and think that I'm in a job now where I only have to work 45 minutes or an hour a night. I can just sort of while the rest of the day away, and that's never been me.
No, Herb, I'll tell you what's one of the funniest things that you can ever be a part of, and that's listening to about 5 or 6 comedians all telling about their worst gig ever, because as bad as you think yours is, it's probably not even close to what the guy next to you is going to come up with. But my worst one, I think, was probably it was in Destin, Florida, and it was right after not the Gulf War that we're in right now, the Persian Gulf conflict. I don't know if you remember that one, the one that General Schwarzkopf ran that lasted about 45 minutes. So I did a show. This was after the war was over and the troops were starting to come home. And these are troops, obviously, who had been in the desert for 7 or 8 months with no liquor, no women, no form of entertainment whatsoever. So they were a little tightly wrapped at the show. And let's just say, I won't go into details or real particulars. Let's just say if they'd had grenades, they probably would have used them on me. It really wasn't my audience, wasn't my crowd, really wasn't an appropriate. Okay, put it this way: telling a bunch of soldiers who, as I just said, really needed to blow off some steam, telling them that they have to be quiet and listen to a comedian for 45 minutes. That is a recipe for disaster right there. I just happen to be the main ingredient in that disaster.
What are your feelings about the newer breed of comic that feel that they have to use foul language in every sentence?
No, that's a very good question. That's never been me. That doesn't mean that I say that I believe that all comedy should be profanity free. I mean, some of the best comedians ever, Richard Pryor comes to mind. We used a lot of foul language, and I don't think you would find many people out there who wouldn't say that Richard Pryor was a genius, and I happen to be one of them. But I think there's a difference. I think that I do think there's too many comedians out there that rely on profanity as the punchline. And audiences, unfortunately, are kind of trained to that. Like I've always told, I've done some instructional speeches sometimes on comedy. And I've always said that if you take a comedian and he tells the joke, and the joke is bum, 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 and he does that at the 8 o'clock show, and at the 10:30 show he does the same joke, but he does bum, 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 swear word, bum. That will probably get a bigger laugh. The 10:30 show where he inserted that word. Don't ask me why. It's like audiences are trained that if somebody swears, then the next word or the next line should be funny, so we should laugh at that. And I think it's a very easy trap for comedians to fall into when they first start out. They swear on stage and it gets a laugh, and they think, oh, well, that's the way to do it then. And I will say that when I first started doing this, when I was 16 or 17, I found myself falling into that trap too. And a lot of it's just out of nerves. And I actually had someone approach me after a show, and he said, you're 16 and you look like you're 12 on stage. And he wasn't saying that degrading. He was just, but he went on to say, when you swear, it just doesn't look like you. I can't believe you. I can't believe your character because this foul language is coming out of your mouth. And it was a very telling lesson. The fact that the guy actually came up to me afterwards to offer that piece of advice, and I've really never forgotten that. And I mean, I don't look like I'm 12 now, but I learned very early on that there's an awful lot of material out there, and there's a lot of funny topics out there in the world that you can discuss without having to insert 4-letter words into every joke.
For your older listeners listening to us today, like me, do you think Don Rickles could make a living today?
Absolutely not. Not even, no. Don Rickles wouldn't make it out of an open mic night. No, there would be protests, and there would be boycotts, and there would be online campaigns from people saying, never, ever visit this club or see this comedian again. So that's the short answer, and it's really the only answer, and it's kind of a shame. But, my dad used to howl at the Dean Martin celebrity roasts.
Yep.
And I remember him, and I used to watch them with him, not so much because I knew what was going on. I didn't know most of the people up there on the dais, but I
watched them because my dad was so entertained by them. So I thought, what's making him laugh so hard? And those were about as politically incorrect, I mean, by today's standards, as you can get. I mean, they were, but they were hilarious. And but I mean, I don't know. There's not to say. I mean, now they have these. They still have these Friars Club roasts on Comedy Central, and they're brutal. They're absolutely brutal, and they are about as politically incorrect as you get. So it's not to say that that kind of humor doesn't exist. But I just think if a Don Rickles just burst into an open mic and started doing Don Rickles shtick, I don't think he'd make it very far.
In your bio, I read that you've been in 48 out of 50 states. Which 2 did you miss?
Well, you want to guess? I always see people want to guess.
Hawaii?
Nope, that's not one. I'll give you one more guess.
North Dakota. I don't have a clue.
North Dakota is not one of them either. Wyoming. Actually, I've been to these states, but my goal is to do comedy in all 50 states. So Wyoming is one, and the other one is Vermont. Those 2, and every other state I've done. Actually, I'm knocking off. I'm going to Arkansas. I actually was in 47, but I say 48 because a week from today, this being the day that we're recording this, I'm going to be in Little Rock, Arkansas. So I'm crossing that one off.
Wonderful, wonderful. You write material. Rather do a stand-up gig or write material?
Oh, I would rather do a stand-up. I'm a performer. In fact, I have tried to, I've tried writing for other comedians, and I haven't enjoyed that because if I think of something funny, I'm the one who wants to do it on stage. And I've also had other comedians try and write for me, and that hasn't worked out really well either. And I don't think it's a selfish thing. It's just I know the way I speak, and I know the way I deliver material. So I will admit writing for me is the hardest part. It can be very tedious. I'm not one of these guys that can just sit down and be funny in front of a computer. I can't do that. Some people can. I'm not one of them. So I have to be out and observing people and, and listening, and that's how I come up with my material. But no, I am and always will be a performer. Always have been.
You do a lot of corporate work. Is there any corporation in your years of doing this that you just couldn't make it with them?
That I just couldn't make. Well, I just couldn't get them to buy into what I was saying.
Correct.
Yeah. There've been a couple. I don't know if I want to name names.
No, you don't. What was wrong?
And there could be a lot of different reasons for that. I mean, it could be doing what I do at corporate events. That's a whole different element than doing stand-up in a nightclub. I mean, it's more difficult, I think. And some people would say, well, why is it more difficult? Because, there could be a bunch of drunks in your audience at a nightclub. And my answer to that is people who go to see comedy at a comedy club, they know that's what they're going to be doing. They made the decision to go to a comedy club. So when they get inside, they're in the mood to laugh. Right. Now, what I do, I make the business community laugh at conferences and sales kickoffs and those kind of things. And that's a niche that I've developed and one that I'm good at. But I always say I'm basically interrupting these people during their workday. So a lot of my shows are at 9 a.m., 1 in the afternoon. People they're listening, but they're always, they won't put it this way, they've always got their phone nearby just in case an important email or a text comes in. So it's a whole different kind of entertainment.
If I'm a young fella or girl that really would like to do what you do, stand up,
yeah.
How do you get inspired to walk outside for an hour or two, come back, and write something funny about what you've just seen?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, to me, it's all about listening and observing people. And I I will eavesdrop on an awful lot of phone conversations. That's something about cell phones.
Yes, it's easy.
I don't, it's not like I'm eavesdropping, but if you're going to talk in public very loudly
Right.
In an airport terminal or in a restaurant or something, then to me, you're fair